Today's teardown is on probably one of the most requested engines I've had since I tore down that 5-liter Coyote. This is a 3.5-liter twin-turbo direct injected V6 from a 2011 to 2014 Ford F150. This is an Ecoboost, and I am actually surprised at how difficult it was to get my hands on one of these. It seems most of my normal sources don't even have them. But I was able to get this one, and I can tell you a few things about it. I think it's an 11 or 12 engine, just judging by the tag that's on it. And a lot of this has been pulled apart and then reassembled with 1 or 2, or in this case, 0 bolts. I don't really know the market on this engine. I can't tell you what's worth money and what's not worth money. This is the very first one we've had in the shop. And my experience with these is very limited as well. I think I've only put plugs in them. So this is a learning experience for both you and I, unless you've worked on these. And we're going to find out what makes this thing tick and what let go inside. The very first thing I noticed about this particular engine is that there's only 2 bolts holding the timing cover on. There might be a third somewhere, but this has definitely been off. So maybe there's a problem behind the timing cover. Maybe this is here for a timing issue, but yeah, I don't know. There's also no harmonic balancer. I'm glad this thing came with turbos, but I can tell you the turbos have been off. I don't know if they swapped them out with the original engine. Maybe the turbos from the core were in worse shape, or we really don't know. I don't know. I don't have a history. I can also tell you the valve covers have been off. All the bolts are loose. The intake manifold is just haphazardly placed here, and now that I'm looking at it, looks like there's some injection lines that we won't be using. And it also says drained on it, and well, you know my history with that. We're really not going to believe that. So let's check out the rest of this. Same deal on the other side. There's only 1 bolt holding the turbo to the manifold. Most of the valve cover bolts are loose, and it looks like we've got a thermostat or water housing. I don't know if that's water housing or crankcase ventilation. Oh yeah, it is. It's a crossover. It goes kind of like so. Yes, that's a crossover manifold. So we're going to go ahead and pull the loose parts off of it and go from there. Oh man, this is going to be so hard to pull the intake. Oh, just think of all the time this is going to save me. More fuel lines, throw those over there. And it looks like one of the rails has no injectors. Oh no, they're there. It's just not bolted down. So it looks like one set of injectors is bolted down, the other is not. Hey look, we found the part that bolts to the turbo with no gasket or screws, but hey, the part's here. Unfortunately, there are no spark plugs in this engine, so I can't really tell anything from something that's not here, but I guess I need tools now, and I'm going to pull the driver's side valve cover off and see what lies underneath. There we go. So this isn't really too oil varnished. It looks pretty clean in here. It's a little dirty, but the cams look decent. There's the provision for the high pressure fuel pump. And it's got a lobe that pushes on a rocker right here. And the chain appears to be intact, and at least the top of the bridge chain guide is there. So let's go to the other side. The same story on this side. The cams look good. This side, this only has 1 high pressure fuel pump, so it does, unlike other engines I've torn down that had 1 per bank, this one just has 1. But everything looks okay in here. Same deal with the chain, that looks good, so yeah, let's keep going. The next thing we're going to do is pull the passenger side turbo off, and we're going to start from top to bottom. We're going to pull the coolant feed line, which is kind of an unusual line. I haven't seen this before, but I'm sure this is on other vehicles. This has like what the transmission cooler and power steering and oil cooler lines sometimes are, where they have these fittings with like a circlip. And I kind of like these because they're very finite. There's no guessing if you've got them in or not. They're either in or not. So we're just going to use this pick tool and get that out of there. Drained. Ha. Now we're going to unbolt the oil feed. Just like so. Next, we're going to try to get the clip off of the coolant return, which seems to be a little hard to get to. They didn't really give you a lot of access to this. I can't imagine doing this in the truck. There we go. Get out of there. This is a little flex section in there, so that'll probably come out a little easier once we get the turbo loose. And now we're going to take the oil return off. Next, we're going to take the bracket loose on the turbine housing. It's just 113. It's pretty easy, hopefully. Hopefully I don't eat my words here. The last step is to take the 2 remaining bolts that hold the turbine housing to the exhaust manifold off, and the turbo should come off at that point. Wow, those are tight. Lots and lots of heat cycles. Wow. These might break off in the manifold. That broke off in the manifold. All right, well, we're going to get the other one off. That's awesome. This one will probably break off as well. I don't know if this is common or just sweet. I probably could have gotten that hot, and they might have come out a little easier or in one piece. But that's in the past, so let's go ahead and get this turbo off. Come on, let go. There we go. Let's take a look at the little guy. Actually, looks like it's in pretty decent shape. There's no shaft play, nothing out of the normal. The impeller's not all chewed up, doesn't look like it ingested anything. It's not all covered in oil like it's been pushing oil out, but someone stripped this off. I guess there's a plate that the exhaust, this is the exhaust gasket here, and then this plate bolts to the turbo, and they got one bolt out and the other one, I don't know if I'll be able to get that out. I'll probably be able to get that out. But everything looks like it's in pretty good shape. Looks like a sellable turbo, so that's kind of cool. Now we're going to pull the passenger side exhaust manifold. Now the driver's side turbo is covered in oil. Looks like it's been that way for some time, but it still looks like it's all right. Doesn't have any major shaft play. Just the normal. I don't see any cracks in the exhaust housing. I don't know if these do that or not. I know a lot of cast iron exhaust housings crack, but this turbo looks okay. It could be from leaking valve cover gaskets or another source. It may not be the turbo itself. But if you look, the inlet does have a tinge of oil varnish. That could be crankcase ventilation. Next, we're going to get the timing cover off and see what the timing system looks like. I think that's it, just 2 bolts. Obviously, that's not all of them from the factory. Someone took most of them out. Just need a little more force. This looks pretty dirty in here. I'm not going to lie. It didn't look too bad at the top, but there's a lot of oil deposits. I think this thing definitely had deferred maintenance. But the thing seems to be okay. It doesn't seem to be too loose. Before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over and see if this turns all the way over and how it feels. Now, there's no plugs in it, so there should really be very little resistance. I say that, and we are stuck. I've gone ahead and pulled the timing components off. The timing chain tensioner seems to have lots of tension in it, but it is oil pressure fed, so that's kind of irrelevant. I was just wondering how far this looks like something to index how far the chain is supposed to be out. You can pull it out, but you can't get it back in. I guess there's a set screw there. But it still had lots left in it, so I don't know if it had a stretch chain or not. I don't know if these edges are notorious for that. But I can't get the chain off until I get the cam gears off. So let's go ahead and pull these cam gears off. I don't know how hard these are to come off, but yeah, man, that chain is something else. It's pretty weighty. I'll likely have to pull these as a pair to the bridge chain. There we go. Guides are on both sides of the bridge tensioner, so that's good. Nothing missing there. On the other side, once I get that bolt out, much of the same. Now I would like to take a moment and talk about the water pump. And typically this is not a topic of discussion for most of the engines I take apart, but this is the Achilles heel of the Ford 3.5 and 3.7 V6s. And it's really quite a shame, because this water pump is chain driven, which that's not the issue, but it's entirely located inside the crankcase. It has no external weep hole. So when this pump fails, and it's not an if, it's when, they will all go bad. It fills the crankcase full of water and usually takes the engine out. I've seen very few that have been able to be recovered after the water pump failed and water has been pumped through the entire oiling system. It's a lot of work. It's almost an engine rebuild at that point. And it's really an incredible oversight in my mind. Water pumps have always been a maintenance item. No manufacturer has water pumps for life. I know some last a lot longer than others, but this really should be something more accessible, and there needs to be a fail-safe, and there isn't one. And I don't know that it would keep me from owning one of these vehicles, but it's definitely something to consider when you're buying one. At least it's not shaped like a Toyota. All right, it's kind of shaped like a Toyota. I shouldn't put that in the video. Next, we're going to go ahead and try to get this oil cooler and filter housing off, which apparently you have to completely dismantle. You can't just pull it off in one piece. So let's get this filter off. Let's see if there's any oil in it, but it's supposed to be drained. Mighty engine guard. Well, the oil is oil colored and not metal colored, so that's a start. Actually, I think I can get this off in one piece. So we're going to try that. It may come back to haunt us, but we'll give it a whirl. There's one bolt sandwiched right here that I'm going to have to use an open end on. Ha! What they want you to do is use a big hex socket, take this out, which holds the cooler on, then you can get straight on this. But I showed them, I use an open end wrench. We're going to start pulling the driver's side head off. The first thing we're going to do is crack the cam caps loose and buzz those out so we can get the cams out. I did notice that one of the VCT solenoids is missing. They must have stolen that. Maybe it had a broken connector and they needed it. We're looking for two things when we're inspecting this. Number one, we're looking at the height of the buckets. If there should be no reason that the valves are not all the way up in their seat. Obviously something is keeping this engine from turning over, but all these look good on this bank. And the journals look okay. The center two here have some minor scoring, but I've seen much worse. Cams are a little worse. You can kind of feel some minor scoring on them, but it's not awful, it's just not great. I don't know that I'd want to sell these cams. I don't know if they're worth anything either. To get access to all of the head bolts, I have to pull these cam sensors out. They kind of block the way, at least on this one. Get that out of the way. Thankfully they come out pretty easy, I think. Might as well pull them both. There is one little pesky 8mm right here. We're going to take this out on both sides before we get the main head bolts out. The head bolts are nothing fancy, surprisingly. They're just some 15mm bolts. To get the head off, we're going to kind of have to wrestle around with the injectors, but I think this head will come off pretty easily. Oh, sweet. This looks pretty tidy in here. There's a little bit of rust in that cylinder, but we don't know how long this engine's been sitting. Let's do the test. These are the non-adjustable rods. They appear to be all right. I don't see any marks in the pistons from contact with anything, a cylinder head or debris or valves. Let's go look at the head. The head too looks pretty good. I don't see any signs of damage, no bent valves. All looks pretty good. Just like the other head, we're going to crack the cam caps loose and then zip them out. Much like the other side, all the journals look good. All the buckets are at the same height, which leads me to think there are no bent valves. And the cams have minor scoring at the worst. They're actually even better than the other side. Go ahead and get the bolts out of the passenger side. See what we have under here. Much like the other side, just a little bit of surface rust in here, but not really enough to keep this thing from turning over. So let's go ahead and test. This is a very accurate test by pushing on the pistons. No, this is not an adjustable rod motor. Aside from a little bit of rust, the cylinder head looks really good. There's just a little bit of rust around that intake valve. There must have been some water getting in. Might have been partially open, but the rest of the head looks really good. Before I flip this thing over and pull the pan, let's see if we can turn this over. Now this should turn over very easily now that there's no valve train, no heads, no valve springs. There's nothing to turn over. It's just the rotating assembly. And it does turn over pretty well. I wonder why it didn't want to turn before. Now let's flip this thing upside down and make a giant mess on my floor. I know you got coolant in you. Oh, that's it. I think we're in good shape. Oh, we're not in good shape. That wasn't too bad. This should come off pretty easy. Famous last words. Maybe I should lock my engine stand. The inside of the pan is just very dirty. I don't really see any chunks of anything. There's no signs of metal. It's just lots and lots of dirty oil varnish. Pickup also looks pretty clean. I don't see any metal in there. There's no real debris in there. Let's pull the pickup and the oil pump off. The O-ring is in pretty good shape. I don't see any issues there. I might not be able to get that oil pump all the way off. I have to get that crank pulled loose first. Now it's time to get the girdle off and we can pull the rods and pistons. We're going to turn the crank over and see if we see any dark spots or signs of something getting hot. It looks pretty decent. I don't see anything cluing me in as to why this engine has a problem. All right, well, let's start getting the rods and pistons out. We'll go from back to front. That's not the right way. We're going to go from front to back. That's the right way. That bearing looks good. That bearing looks good too. That bearing looks pretty decent. Everything looks good so far. I think it's safe to say that this did not have an oiling issue. The bearings look fantastic. There's no scoring, no signs of oil starvation. That was not the issue with this engine, but I did find a problem. This is the passenger side front cylinder. The number 1 compression ring looks normal, looks good. The number 2 is a little carbon locked, but I can probably pry that out of there if I wanted to. But it looks good. The oil ring is easy to move. You get to the second cylinder on that bank, and the number 2 compression ring is a little stuck. And the gap is very small. And the oil ring is easy to move, however. And the rear cylinder is the same story as the one before it. But then you get to the first cylinder on the driver's side. And this is where I noticed the biggest issue. Obviously, the number 1 compression ring, that's normal. But this is the number 2 compression ring, and I cannot move it. And it's barely protruding from the piston itself. The ring gap is closed down all the way. It is completely shut down. I actually thought it was a broken ring, a cracked ring at first. But this is actually the gap. I can't even fit a feeler gauge in there. I can move the oil control ring just fine, but that second compression ring is either carbon locked or it's collapsed. It could be collapsed. Maybe this engine overheated. I'm not quite sure. But this definitely had a compression issue. I guarantee you that either through misfire codes, it could have burned oil as well. I think I noted earlier that the driver's side compressor inlet on the turbo had some oil varnish in it. I'm not quite sure how the crankcase ventilation system works on this engine. There was not really enough parts on it for me to tell. But maybe it burned oil, but it definitely suffered some compression issues that probably caused a misfire, and that's likely why this engine was replaced. Let's check out the bores and see if we can see any damage. This bore has a few vertical lines on it, vertical marks on it, but I can't feel it. So it's not terribly deep. There's a few rust stains. I think we pointed that out earlier, but these look pretty good. And on the other side, this is the cylinder here that had the ring issue, the worst of the ring issues, I should say. I don't see any issues either. I don't have anything to check whether the cylinders are out of round, but I don't suspect they would be. I don't see any major wear. There's just, again, some staining from a little bit of rust that was in there. At this point, I am done. I don't really see the need to pull the crank out of the block. I actually would prefer to sell it this way, and I don't really fear any oil starvation issues, any issues with the main bearing or damage to the crank itself. There was no metal in the oil. There was no signs of any of that when we pulled this engine apart. I do think this engine suffered from neglect and severe extended oil change intervals. The amount of varnish in this engine is pretty extreme. I've seen much worse. Believe me, I've seen worse. But it does look very dirty, and this engine clearly had some compression issues with the rings looking the way it did. The carbon was likely a major culprit for why those rings were collapsed or stuck in their ringland. If you'd like to buy parts off of this engine, I'm going to put an email in the description. Feel free to shoot us an email off of parts for this engine or any of the other engines I've torn down, and I guess I'll catch you on the next one. You know, actually, I need to address a couple comments that I've seen in videos of my other teardown videos, and that referring to engines that I've shown that I haven't done a video on. I'm going to get to them. The 6.3 AMG engine, there's going to be a video on it. I can't tell you when, but I keep buying other cool stuff, and unfortunately, the way my mind works, the coolest stuff gets pushed to the front. I don't know if this is the coolest thing to you guys, but it was the first one of these I've had the chance to take apart, so I wanted to show you that. And I've got a bunch of new stuff in, a whole bunch. Actually, I'm going to show you some of the engines you can look forward to seeing teardown videos on. This is a 5.8 liter M137 Mercedes V12 from an S600. And this is the first V12 I've had the chance to take apart. So I jumped all over it. I actually do like working on Mercedes engines from this era. These things are notorious for oil consumption and out-of-round cylinders. I'll have some tooling in here to check that when we pull that one apart. While we're talking about Mercedes, I also managed to get my hands on an OM642. This is what comes in a Sprinter or an ML320, a GL320. This is the Blue Tech. I think this is from a 2013 ML. But this will be a really fun one to take apart. There's a lot of money in this engine. This is probably going to be one of my most profitable cores. Another K20. This is out of an 06 Up Civic Si. No idea what's wrong with it. It actually came out of one of our parts cars that I couldn't start because it had the oil pan knocked off of it. And of course, I still have this Gen 2 Coyote to tear down. And now that I have the not so great story on it, I am about ready to do a video on this one. This is probably what I'm most excited about. This is a VR30 DDTT out of an Infiniti Q50S. It's a twin turbo, 3-liter dual cam direct injected V6. And this is the first one I've had a chance to buy, and I'm happy it's incredibly complete. It has the intercoolers, it has the turbos on it. This is gonna be a real fun one. I still have an LLY Duramax that I need to take apart, both a 5.9 and a 6.7 Cummins. Both of those need to come all the way down. And I have plenty of LS engines. I mean, that's our bread and butter. They're everywhere here. I'll sprinkle a few of those teardowns amidst the rest of the engines I've shown you here. I really appreciate you guys. This has gone way further than I ever thought. This is just crazy. I mean, it's crazy, but the feedback I'm getting is fantastic. So keep it up, guys, and I will catch you on the next one.